Hey, how's it going, folks? It's Rosie here. So, the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim is a world filled with mysterious creatures, uncanny places, perplexing stories, and so much more paranormal content. Hidden bits of lore like this are a huge part of what makes Bethesda games so endlessly replayable. Even now, over a decade since Skyrim's debut, there are still loads of unsolved mysteries to keep fans up at night. So, in this video, we're going to try to solve 5 of Skyrim's most peculiar mysteries. And this time around, I found some really good ones that for whatever reason just haven't been very thoroughly explored by other creators, so we're keeping it very fresh and very original. In fact, so much so, that I'm confident that I've come up with at least one idea that you have not considered before for each of the 5 mysteries I'm covering. If you like this kind of content, then this channel is for you, so be sure to hit that subscribe button. So let's dive deep into 5 unsolved mysteries in The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. Let's kick things off with the story of Aerin rescuing Mjoll the Lioness. The story we can gather from dialogue is that Mjoll was dungeon delving in Mjoll and she got decked by a dwarven centurion in the loot room. Then she managed to crawl her way back here, took the elevator to the surface, and passed out here. When she woke up, this man Aerin was tending to her wounds, but plenty of fans pointed out that there's something just not right about this story. This is a tucked away part of the wilderness, it's not a likely place for someone to just happen by, so what was Aerin doing out here? One theory I've seen a few times is that he was a Dark Brotherhood assassin and he was contracted to kill Mjoll, so he tracked her here but had a change of heart when he found her wounded and instead became her protector. A claim fans often make is that he seems to be wealthy despite having no clear source of income, and this theory would explain that. But I think Aerin's wealth is a detail that tends to be a bit embellished. Sure, he has one of the nicer homes in Riften, but it's not a manor, and you know, Riften's not the same as, say, Solitude, is it? And yeah, he wears fine clothes, but this is a common outfit. I mean, Driffa wears fine clothes, but she's just a shopkeep. Also, I'm inclined to think that you can't just quit the Dark Brotherhood, especially not with an unfinished contract. The Dark Brotherhood I know would definitely finish the contract on Mjoll and punish Aerin for defaulting on it. So I'm definitely not ruling this theory completely out, I just don't think the details add up, and it needs more. Let's backtrack a bit and consider the possibility that maybe he did indeed follow her up from the depths of Mjoll. What could he have been doing down there? Well, there is one possibility that works. The loot room also contains an entrance to Blackreach, and the Falmer down there keep human slaves they capture from the surface. So, perhaps Aerin was one of these captives and he escaped. However, there's no way for us to actually open these stairways from down here, but we shouldn't assume that means there is no way to do it within the context of the lore. It may have just not occurred to Bethesda to put a lever for it on this side, or maybe they thought about it and decided against it to make it so we can't raid all the loot rooms without actually clearing each of their respective dungeons. We actually kind of have to assume that there are more ways of getting in and out of Blackreach than actually exist in-game, because how else could the Falmer, leave to get the captives and come back? We must be meant to assume that they have ways of opening the stairways that they use from time to time, or that they have secret tunnels in and out. There is still a problem with Aerin having escaped from Blackreach. There's an easier elevator to reach right before the entrance to Mjol's loot room, so why not take this one? Well, maybe he did. After all, this exits out just a stone's throw away down the road from where the Mjol elevator would have left Mjoll. So it's totally reasonable that Aerin may have escaped through this elevator, turned up this road, and found Mjoll. Though it would still be a bit of a coincidence that the timing worked out that way. But there's actually a more feasible version of this theory that fixes that small problem. Maybe the Falmer hadn't taken Aerin all the way to Blackreach when Mjoll raided Mjol. Perhaps he was contained somewhere in these ruins when Mjoll showed up and, started executing Order 66 all up in the Falmer. Then he decided to use this opportunity to escape and followed Mjoll to the loot room, where he saw the Centurion squash her and watched her crawl to the elevator. Then he snuck around the Centurion and followed her to the surface. That adds up pretty well. But we're not quite done. If the Falmer captured Aerin, doesn't that entail that he must have been in or at least nearby Mjol for that to happen? So we still have the question of, what was he doing around here? Well, given this body here, the implication seems to be that the bulk of these slaves were members of the bandit gangs that used the ruins of Mjol and Ralbafar as hideouts. That also explains why they're hostile towards us in Blackreach, and why their class in the game files is Bandit. So, I can only assume that Aerin was a bandit, which could also explain being wealthy enough to own a nice house in Riften without having an obvious source of income. Perhaps he originally bought the house as a way of storing the money he got from his exploits in an asset. Then when he got snatched by the Falmer, and Mjoll inadvertently came to his rescue, he decided to repay her by using it as a home for the two of them. This idea also adds a very interesting wrinkle to Mjoll and Aerin's relationship. Mjoll despises bandits. When she was young, a bandit gang raided her village and killed her brother right in front of her. So why befriend Aerin then? I can only assume she doesn't know he was a bandit. She must have said something about how she hates bandits pretty soon after they met. Maybe they passed by a few bandit camps on their way to Riften and it came up. This theory also explains Aerin's extreme generosity or even obedience to Mjoll. He's the exact kind of person that hurt his new savior as a child, so he feels guilty, and all he can do to make up for his past is spend the rest of his days being a friend to Mjoll and providing her with a place to live. So this is the theory I'm going with. It adds up very well and has a nice irony to it, which feels very planned. Hopefully Aerin will redeem himself through this change of heart that Mjoll ignited within him. When walking along Skyrim's roads, you may be lucky enough to encounter the Headless Horseman. This specter rides all over, but he always inevitably goes to Hamvir's Rest in Whiterun. There's one popular theory as to who this Headless Man is, and I think it is more than likely correct, and that's that he is in fact Ragnar the Red. In case you've forgotten since last time you played Skyrim, there's a song called Ragnar the Red, and it's a local favorite in Whiterun. The story it tells is that this very arrogant man named Ragnar the Red rode his horse from Rorikstead to Whiterun, and when he got there, he started boasting about his feats in combat in what I suppose was their local tavern. Then, a shield maiden named Matilda called him out on his BS and challenged him to a duel, and she ended up decapitating him. So a number of things about this song fit with the Headless Horseman. Ragnar was known to ride a horse, and he lost his head, but he doesn't ride to the city of Whiterun, he rides to Hamvir's Rest in the plains. Why? Well, I'll venture a guess. Perhaps Matilda is buried here, and Ragnar rides here every night to challenge her to a rematch. But then why doesn't she accept? Maybe she simply doesn't want to, or perhaps she can't because unlike Ragnar, her soul departed Mundus when she died. After all, she was a shield maiden, so maybe she went to Sovngarde, but boasters are not given such an honor, so poor Ragnar will likely never get his rematch. Next up, if you journey to the southern edge of Solstheim, you'll find this little cottage called Hrodulf's house. There's a trapdoor leading to the basement where you'll find some reavers rejoicing. It seems they've just claimed this house as their own. There's a few notes in a journal lying around the house that tell the story of the home's previous owner, Hrodulf. He moved in from Solitude a little while ago for unknown reasons. Maybe he just wanted to get away from the civil war in Skyrim. It's not known if he had any family in Solitude, but the man he exchanged these letters with was named Bjornulfr, and he seems to have been his romantic partner. Shortly after Hrodulf settled into his new home, he started to hear noises coming from his basement. As he describes it in his journal, there is a calling from the depths, a rumble drone that sings to me at night. He then felt himself drawn to find the source of the noise, so he started digging a tunnel to it and eventually found a large Dwemer machine. Something about this experience took a toll on Hrodulf's mental state, until his letters to Bjornulfr became nonsensical. So, Bjornulfr came to Solstheim out of concern. However, it seems that before he got there, Hrodulf realized that something was wrong and he needed to leave the house, so he made way for a boat that he kept by the coast, but was sadly killed by a burnt Spriggan when he reached it. So, Bjornulfr arrived to find the house empty, but then two reavers showed up and killed him as well. So ends the sad love story of this house, but we're left with a mystery. What is this machine that drove Hrodulf to madness? Well, it's clearly Dwemer, and its function seems to have to do with sound. There's also two lines from some of Hrodulf's writings that I think are relevant here. First, this one from his journal. The murmurer in the earth and we talk, I lay my head against the dirt. And this one from a letter he wrote to Bjornulfr. Do not come to this place, I have not much self left. The earth will take us both. The word earth comes up in each of them. And there's a concept in Elder Scrolls lore that combines the Dwemer, sound, and the earth, tonal architecture. Here's a crash course on this subject for those that aren't familiar. Back in the Dawn era, some of the original spirits chose to become the Earthbones, which are like the laws of nature in Mundus. During the height of Dwemer ingenuity, their brightest minds discovered that these Earthbones can be manipulated into doing certain things through sound. Most notably, certain sounds can be used to redistribute divine energy, which is how they created the brass giant Numidium, and how the Tribunal made themselves gods. This practice of using sounds to manipulate the Earthbones is called tonal architecture. So could this machine in Hrodulf's basement be some sort of tonal device? I think that's right on the money, and there's a source from ESO called A Guide to Dwemer Megastructures that I believe was written to give this machine a name. Let's read the relevant section. The Dwemer use sound in mining, medicine, architecture, even psychology. It's the latter use that I find most intriguing. According to ancient Chimeri scholarship, the Dwemer could employ tonal forces to bend weaker minds to their will, a form of complex oral hypnosis. Luckily, the dwarves never managed to mobilize this technology on the battlefield against our august ancestors. The scale and complexity of the devices likely made transportation nearly impossible, but they still managed to employ it on a limited scale using massive devices called tonal resonators. If the legends are true, these resonators were incredibly complex architectural wonders. They stood taller than most imposing giants, and filled cavernous chambers with pipes, dials, and pistons. When enabled, the resonators released a series of powerful tones that could alter the brainwaves of lesser mer and men, inducing deep calm and profound pleasure, or even paranoia and terror. So yes, I believe this machine is a tonal resonator, though what we can see is not taller than a giant. However, this is just what Hrodulf dug up. For all we know, there are other parts of this machine that extend deeper into the earth. Though if we enter free camera mode, we can see that's not the case. But we shouldn't take this as facts because, we're not actually supposed to be able to get back here. What we're meant to see is this. So something about the sounds emitted by this tonal resonator compelled Hrodulf to dig a tunnel to it. So is it possible that the machine somehow did that on purpose? Let's speculate for a minute that the machine is indeed capable of some level of reasoning. Why would it want the tunnel? Maybe to extend the reach of the sounds it emits. I'm very excited to look into this more, because I think this machine may tie into more of Solstime's mysteries as well, like maybe the Ash Spawn, the Bloodskull clan, and other creatures too. I mean, maybe the machine sent the Burnt Spriggan to stop Hrodulf from escaping. It's all very exciting stuff. But we're not quite done with this house yet. There's a unique item in here that fans have taken to calling the Shadow Torch, and it's located in the tunnel. At first glance, it just seems like a normal torch, but upon further examination, you'll notice that unlike normal torches, it's weightless and has no value. And if you equip this mysterious torch, you'll discover its most fascinating characteristic. Unlike the other torches in Skyrim, this one casts dynamic shadows. I have seen claims that it also never burns out like other torches do, but that doesn't seem to be true. I've tested it on PC and console, and it burns out after 4 minutes, same as every other torch. So what in Oblivion is this Shadow Torch? Could it be tied to the tonal resonator somehow? It is worth noting that the last line of Hrodulf's journal is, "Fire from the deep." However, I think there's a much simpler explanation for our Shadow Torch. What is it really? It's a more technologically advanced torch than the ones in Skyrim's base game. The reason most don't cast shadows is because Bethesda didn't see that technology as something worth creating initially. It's not some lore secret, it's just a tech limitation. So what then is the Shadow Torch? Well, a dev probably decided to try making the tech for dynamic shadows during Dragonborn's development. So they did some tinkering and tried their creation out on this torch. Then, for whatever reason, it didn't end up getting implemented into the game. I'm not a tech expert, but my guess here is that the way this was done, by applying it to a specific item, entails that every single torch in the game would have to have been manually replaced with one of these. And the senior devs just didn't see that as worth it. So the Shadow Torch ended up as an unused item in the game files. Then when someone was cluttering the inside of Hrodulf's house, they needed to place a torch. So they spawned one in, but they mistakenly picked the Shadow Torch instead of a regular one. Thus how it ended up in the game. So no, I don't think the Shadow Torch is some grand lore secret, but I do think this is just as interesting. I love little development tidbits like this. Here's an obscure one for you. One faction that's only appeared in the Elder Scrolls Travels games is what are called the Ice Tribes. These glimmering blue warriors were the primary antagonist of the Elder Scrolls Travels Dawnstar. They inhabited some northern areas of Tamriel, at least during the events of those games, which took place in some ambiguous time in the Third Era. They were also friendly with some local creatures, such as Gehenifs, which are these badass-looking things. So why don't we hear anything about these ice tribes in the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim? Well, the Travels games are considered to be spin-offs. However, they were made by a studio called Vir 2L, which is a ZeniMax-owned company and the sister company to Bethesda Softworks. So they were developed under the same umbrella as the mainline games. And we know that at least some of the Elder Scrolls Travels Shadowkey is canon, because Neloth references Azra Nightwielder from that game. So it's possible that the Ice Tribes have a place in the canon, but where exactly would they fit in? Well, there is an ice-themed race of people that comes up a little bit in Morrowind era lore called the Kamali, and they were expanded upon in the SO. They're an Akaviri race, but little is known about what they look like, but the book Mysterious Akavir refers to them as demons. Also, the region of Akavir that they're from, Kamal, is known to have a very cold climate, so presumably the Kamali are these, like snow and ice-themed, demonic-looking people. And about a decade before the events of ESO, an armada of these Kamali invaded Tamriel, led by their king Adasumdir Kamal. They began their campaign by sacking Windhelm, then marched south and almost reached Riften. But then they changed course and ended up in Morrowind, where they got cornered in Stonefalls and annihilated by the combined armies of Skyrim, Morrowind, and Blackmarsh. However, according to the Pocket Guide to the Empire, 1st edition The Elsewhere Confederacy, a remnant of the Kamali army resurfaced in Cyrodiil over 200 years after Dir Kamal was defeated. How could that be if his army was decimated at Stonefalls? And that's not the only thing that's odd about this. This remnant resurfaced in Cyrodiil when they took the Imperial City. Now that was not on the original campaign's route, was it? So how can we make sense of this? Well, at some point, Dir Kamal must have sent at least one detachment of troops away from the main force. That's the only thing that can explain the existence of this remnant, despite there being no Kamali survivors from the battle at Stonefalls. Along with how this remnant resurfaced pretty far away from where the initial war occurred. So yeah, this remnant must have started out as a detachment that was sent on an op away from the main force, and they somehow survived in hiding until, for whatever reason, they decided to come out of hiding and seize the Ruby Throne. So how could they have survived in hiding for 200 years? Well, we don't know anything about Kamali lifespans, so it's really not out of the question that they did just live that long. But I do have a more entertaining idea. The book Mysterious Akavir mentions another curious detail about the Kamali. Every summer, they thaw out and invade Tangmo, but the brave monkey folk always drive them away. At first glance, this notion that they thaw out seems to be meant metaphorically, but maybe it's not. Perhaps the Kamali actually do freeze in the snowy regions of Akavir and thaw out during summer. And if you haven't guessed where I'm going with this yet, here it is. Maybe this detachment of Dir Kamal's invasion force froze themselves when they learned of his defeat and eventually thawed out, which is when they went for the Ruby Throne. So how does all that lead us to the Ice Tribes? Well, if Dir Kamal sent one detachment away from the main force, then perhaps he sent more as well. And some of those troops ended up becoming what the ES Travels games call the Ice Tribes. Their appearance in those games does give off a very snowy, demonic vibe. Also, their skin is icy, as if ice is part of their very being. So the notion that they could literally freeze for long periods of time without any issues doesn't seem like too out there of an idea. Another thing that's coming to mind is those frozen Falmer in the Chantry of Auriel. If these fallen snow elves can survive being encased in ice, then I don't see why these ice tribes or Kamali wouldn't be able to. This is a great theory, but there is a slight problem with the ice tribes being Kamali. One of the sources about the Kamali in the ESO is called Crafting Motif 18, Akaviri style, and it describes Kamali weapons and armor in detail. And a lot of the individual pieces of Ice Tribe apparel do look exactly like how Kamali variants are described in this source. But there's also some garments that really don't resemble what this source is describing. It says that Kamali shields are usually wood-based, not solid metal, that the chest armor usually has a triangular shape to it, and that their shoulders are always rectangular. But this can easily be reconciled when we consider that maybe their style changed over time when they became the Ice Tribes. I mean, as a foreign faction in a land they're not welcome in, they would have had to work with whatever resources they could find out in the wild to make new stuff. So maybe their blacksmiths had to adjust the way things actually looked to suit the materials they had access to. And of course, the out-of-lore explanation is that whoever wrote this source probably didn't want the connections between the Ice Tribes and the Kamali to be too obvious. Thus, why some pieces are a perfect match and others are not. So where do the Ice Tribes live in the Elder Scrolls Travels games? In Shadowkey, they're found in the Glacial Crawl in High Rock, and in Dawnstar, they're just all around the Dawnstar area. So if our theory is right so far, then Dir Kamal probably sent some detachments west while his army occupied Windhelm. Why would he have done that? What was their mission? I believe the answer lies in his reason for invading Tamriel to begin with. The book, The Second Akaviri Invasion, from ESO, shed some light on this. One report stated that Dir Kamal was seeking someone or something called the Ordained Receptacle, but this could easily be a bungled translation. So what could this Ordained Receptacle be? I theorize that it's in fact what we call the Eye of Magnus. And Dir Kamal wanted it so badly because, well, it's powerful. This is something I explored in a lot more detail in this massive video I just did about Shalador, so if you want to know how he was involved in this, and add that to your watch list. The Second Akaviri Invasion also mentions that very few Kamali knew any Tamrielic, and those that knew some didn't know a lot. So how is that relevant? Well, where did the Kamali start their invasion? Windhelm, and the book makes a point to draw attention to how odd that is. Starting somewhere like the Telvanni Peninsula would have been a better strategy, so why Windhelm? Well, what's significant about that city? It's the oldest still used city in Skyrim, but it's not the very first city, that's Sarfall, where the Eye of Magnus resides. So, perhaps the Kamali mistranslated some of their sources and mistakenly thought they'd find this ordained receptacle in Windhelm. Then after they sacked the city and couldn't find it, Dir Kamal discovered the error. He was like, oh, this is the oldest still inhabited city. We need the very oldest city. So he sent some troops westward to search for Sarfall. However, they never found Sarfall because Shalador had deployed a very clever countermeasure to hide it from them. I don't want to spoil what that was in case you haven't seen the Shalador video, so yeah, that's what you need to know for now. Shalador hid Sarfall. So, after these Kamali passed through the glaciers of Winterhold without finding Sarfall, they just kind of continued west thinking it might be further. And they ended up becoming the Ice Tribes when they found out that the main invasion force was wiped out. Could be that the remnants that took the Ruby Throne actually was from the Ice Tribes and journeyed south for some reason. Now for just a minute here, let's speculate about why this remnants may have taken the Ruby Throne. So all that we know about this literally comes from a few sentences in the first edition of the Pocket Guide to the Empire. So the details in this source are very vague, but by combining them with what else we know about the Kamali from other sources, we can form a story. And that story is that around year 812 of the Second Era, a remnant of the Dir Kamal army came out of hiding in Cyrodiil and took the throne by force from the rulers at the time, who were successors of a warlord named Atreus. The Kamali's control of the throne apparently didn't last long. It really doesn't say how it ended, but yeah, I imagine someone overthrew them as well. So let's speculate as to what this remnant's motives might have been, based on the theory we've established. Well, what are we thinking that the mission of the detachments that ended up becoming these remnants was? That they were searching for the ruins of Sarfall and the Eye of Magnus within. So maybe even after Dir Kamal's defeat, they never stopped looking. After all, in Shadowkey, there was an ice tribe in High Rock's Glacial Crawl. That's pretty far to the west of Windhelm, isn't it? So why would they go that far? Well, if you can't find something, what might you do? You might expand the search. So my guess is that the Ice Tribes did just that. They searched Skyrim so thoroughly and didn't come up with the Eye of Magnus that they concluded that the only explanation was that one of the ruins they had checked out must have been Sarfall and someone's already gotten to it and moved the eye. So how did that lead them to the Imperial City? Well, what is the Eye of Magnus? Well, that's a mystery in itself, isn't it? But we know that it's very, very powerful. So if you're thinking that someone already has it, you'd probably check with, the most powerful factions in the region, right? Because the eye could be an explanation for that power, or other way around, maybe, they're thinking, well, who would have the resources to find it? So, perhaps this remnant took the Imperial City because they were thinking it was a logical place to look for the Eye of Magnus. I also have a further thought here. Maybe they were thinking that even if the Eye wasn't there, they could essentially hold the Empire for ransom. You know, promise to hand over the throne to whoever brought them the Eye. But unfortunately for these remnants, Shalador wasn't even alive at that time to hand it over. So like I said, we don't really know how that fell apart or what happened to the other ice tribes. I suppose their numbers would have gradually dwindled down over the years, especially considering that they were an enemy in the Travels games. However, the notion that they might literally freeze themselves presents us with another idea. Maybe even now, in the 4th era, there are still hidden alcoves of frozen Kamali remnants. And given that ES6 is going to take us to Hammerfell and possibly High Rock 2, I think there's a lot of potential for, a quest, a side quest, or a faction quest that involves these ice tribes coming back. After all, the Elder Scrolls 6 official announcement teaser that came out, 7 years ago. Yeah, wow. So anyway, the common theory as to what this depicts, which comes from Camelworks, who I'm going to talk more about in a second, is that this is a town called Azra's Crossing, and that's where Shadowkey opened. This is actually what one of my first videos was about. If you've been following me that long, thank you so much. When I came up with that, that was because Camel's coverage had left me with a thought, and I was like, ooh, I think I might know something else, that's something to expand on what he's saying. So yeah, I made that video because of that. And I want to make sure to talk about Kamel for a second here, because in case you're not aware, Camel's going through some shit right now. So what happened is his phone got stolen, and whoever stole it used it to do something that violated Google's terms of service, and the end result was he lost access to his YouTube channel. Fortunately, he started a new channel, and he's been uploading all his content to it, and creators like me are hyping it up, to make sure he gets his following back. In case you're somehow not familiar with Camelworks, he's an amazing Elder Scrolls YouTuber. His Elder Scrolls Detective series is a collection of some of the most incredible Elder Scrolls lore videos ever. And his channel was, but while it still is, a huge inspiration behind my content. Like, really, my channel probably would not exist if he hadn't inspired me to try. So I'm doing everything I can to help him get back to where he was. So here's a summary of my theory about the Ice Tribes. I believe they're remnants of Adasumdir Kamal's invasion force that failed in their mission to locate the Eye of Magnus, or the Ordained Receptacle as they called it. And this is definitely a subject I will revisit in the future. Really, well, I know a lot more about the Eye of Magnus than I've ever covered before. It's just, to avoid spoilers, I tend not to say too much about things other than the immediate subjects. But yeah, I have a theory that I'm confident in as to what it is and what specifically the Snow Elves wanted it for, and I have a feeling the Kamali wanted it for that same specific reason. But that's definitely a longer subject right there, so I'm saving that for years down the road. But things can change. Like maybe I win $10 million in the lottery, then I just get started the next day. Or I haven't announced it yet, but I'm actually trying to start a separate career in addition to YouTube as a screenwriter, so maybe I end up with some big deal somewhere and then I get started. But that's a long shot right there. And that's a wrap, folks. Those are 5 unsolved mysteries in The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. I'm going to get started on a Fallout New Vegas video in spirit of the Fallout Fan Festival in Goodsprings, which I'll be attending. Thank you all so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please be sure to leave a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and share this video everywhere you can, especially Reddit and Discord. Those are great platforms to share content like this. See you next time.